Este espacio es para conversar un poco sobre la participación civil, la participación de la sociedad civil en la Unfccc. We are going to start in a bit. We're having trouble with the translation.
No. Sorry.
Ahora sí.
So does anyone, ¿alguien no habla inglés? Elevando la mano. Does anyone, no. No, así no funciona, ¿verdad? Sí, ¿todo el mundo habla inglés? ¿Alguien no habla inglés? So we'll do it in English, yes.
If everyone speak English, yeah, okay. So we are going to start in English, and if someone comes and needs Spanish, we are going to do the translation. So thank you everyone for being here. I'm Adriana Vasquez from La Ruta del Clima, and today we are going to be speaking about the participation of civil society in the Unfccc. First, we are going to have a section related about human rights of access and the climate crisis, with the participation of Anastasia Yadrossi. She's going to be online, so everyone has to have like the thing, the headset to hear her. And Teresa Arnesen from the UN Human Rights Office, and Adrián Martínez Blanco from La Ruta. Thank you.
Yes.
So Anastasia, are you there?
Yes, I am there. Do you hear me well?
Okay, so everybody has a headset on, so you can hear Anastasia. She's online.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. See me white.
Okay.
Everybody's putting their headset, and I'll let you know. Okay. Okay, Anastasia, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. I'm Anastasia Jadrossi, and I am an associate expert at the legal affairs at the Aarhus Convention Secretariat. And I would like to thank very much the organizers of this event, La Ruta del Clima, CAN Latin America, Sostenibilidad Sin Fronteras, Amnesty International, and AIDA for the opportunity to deliver the presentation today on the promotion of the principles of the Aarhus Convention in UNFCCC processes and outcomes on behalf of the Aarhus Convention Secretariat. And for those who are not familiar with the Aarhus Convention, its full name is the Convention on Access to Information, Public Participation in Decision-Making, and Access to Justice in Environmental Matters. It entered into force on the 30th of October 2001, and currently there are 46 parties to the convention across the UNEC region, which includes Europe and Central Asia. The convention is open for global accession to all member states of the United Nations, and in October of 2021, at the 7th session of the Meeting of the Parties, which is the governing body of the convention, the parties have welcomed Guinea-Bissau as the first African country to join the Aarhus Convention. And Guinea-Bissau will become a party to the convention upon the deposit of its accession instrument. So the Aarhus Convention is a legally binding instrument on procedural environmental rights, the right of access to information, public participation in decision-making, and access to justice in environmental matters. And there are two other important provisions I would like to focus on today for the purpose of the discussions with respect to climate change processes and outcomes under the UNFCCC. And this is Article 3, Paragraph 7, of the convention, which requires parties to promote the convention's principles in international forums, and Article 3, Paragraph 8, which is the provision of the convention protecting environmental defenders. And it provides that parties shall ensure that the persons exercising the rights under the convention shall not be penalized, persecuted, or harassed in any way for their involvement. And starting with Article 3, Paragraph 7 of the Convention, parties to the Convention have an obligation to promote the principles of the Convention in international environmental decision-making processes and international organizations in matters relating to the environment. And in order to implement these provisions, the meeting of the parties have adopted in 2005 the Almaty Guidelines, which provide guidance to parties with respect to both the rules and practices of international forums, as well as the treatment of substantive issues within these forums. And in particular, I will highlight a very important principle, which is enshrined in paragraph 15 of the Almaty Guidelines, which is very relevant in the context of climate-related negotiations, such as COPs. It aims at ensuring that all members, whether delegations of least developed countries, NGOs, and other interested stakeholders, are able to attend and to voice their concerns in international forums, including ones on climate change. And paragraph 15 aims at ensuring a balanced and equitable process within international forums by taking special measures with respect to members of the public that have a differentiated capacity, resources, social cultural circumstances, or economic or political influence. And it also recognizes that the importance of facilitating and supporting the participation of those constituencies that are mostly affected in the decisions taken within these forums and that do not have means for participation. At the 7th session of the meeting of the parties of the Aarhus Convention, parties have specifically requested the working group of the parties, which is the highest intersessional body of the convention in charge of assessing on an annual basis the implementation of Article 3, Paragraph 7, to focus its work on forums dealing with climate change. And it further encouraged each party to promote the principles of the convention in addition to the procedures, also with respect to work programs, project decisions, instrument, and other substantive outputs of those forums whose practices currently still do not reflect the guidelines or the principles of the convention. And the impact of the Almaty Guidelines in UNFCCC processes, including the COPs like COP27, depends on the extent to which parties of the Aarhus Convention take seriously their commitment to promote the application of the guidelines in the forums in which they participate. And it's important to note that almost a quarter of the parties to the UNFCCC are also parties to the Aarhus Convention. And while the success of the Almaty Guidelines in ensuring wider civil society participation in international environmental decision-making processes will also depend on the cooperation of other states which are not parties to the convention, the Aarhus parties can play a strong and a leading role in ensuring transparency and public participation in both UNFCCC processes and in its outcomes. And as mentioned earlier, the implementation of Article 3, Paragraph 7 of the Convention is assessed on an annual basis by the working group of the parties at a dedicated thematic session. And for a number of years now, this has included a specific focus at each thematic session on UNFCCC processes. And at these sessions, parties, NGOs, and other stakeholders, including members of the UNFCCC Secretariat, have the opportunity to share experiences, practices, and challenges in relation to the promotion of the Aarhus Convention principles within UNFCCC processes. And at the most recent working group session, which was held in June of this year, the parties have recognized that more efforts should be done to enhance transparency and effective public participation in international environmental related decision-making, including in processes related to climate matters. And finally, I would now like to turn to the protection of environmental defenders, who are increasingly subject to arbitrary restrictions, detentions, threats, and attacks for their work and efforts in protecting the environment. And sadly, this includes climate activists. Environmental defenders play a major role in pushing for more ambitious climate goals and supporting the development of important legislative and policy changes and changes in jurisprudence. And as mentioned earlier, Article 3, Paragraph 8 of the Convention offers protection to environmental defenders, including climate activists, by requiring parties to ensure that persons exercising their rights under the Convention shall not be penalized, persecuted, or harassed in any way for their involvement. And at the 7th session of the meeting of the parties to the Aarhus Convention in October 2021, the meeting of the parties has established a rapid response mechanism in the form of a special rapporteur to complement and strengthen the existing role of the Compliance Committee in ensuring an effective response to environmental defenders experiencing or at an imminent threat of persecution, penalization, and harassment for their involvement. And for those who are not familiar with the Aarhus Convention, the Compliance Committee is the body in charge of reviewing the compliance by Aarhus parties with the provisions of the Convention. The rapid response mechanism under the Aarhus Convention is the world's first mechanism specifically safeguarding environmental defenders to be established within a legally binding framework, either under the UN system or other intergovernmental structure. And at its third extraordinary session, which was held in June of this year, the meeting of the parties to the Aarhus Convention have elected by consensus Mr. Michel Forst as the first special rapporteur on environmental defenders under the Aarhus Convention. And the special rapporteur's role is to take measures to protect any person experiencing or at imminent threat of penalization, persecution, or harassment for seeking to exercise the rights under the convention. And any member of the public or any party to the convention can submit a complaint to the special rapporteur, who needs to act immediately upon receipt of a complaint. And the special rapporteur may investigate the alleged persecution, penalization, or harassment of a person or persons for seeking their access to exercise the rights under the convention by any state that is a party to the convention. And such penalization, persecution, or harassment may be the result of the direct action of a party to the convention, but it may also arise from the failure by a party to act to protect the alleged victims from such actions by third parties, including private actors or other states. And I would just like to conclude to say that on the 23rd of November, the Special Rapporteur will hold a meeting from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Geneva time for Aarhus parties and any other interested stakeholder who would be interested to hear more about his working methods and also his plans for the mandate. And it is an open meeting, and any information on registration is available on the Aarhus Convention's website. And thank you very much for your attention.
Hola, muchas gracias. Anastasia, ¿dónde están? Thank you very much, Anastasia, for your participation. Now we are going to speak with Teresa Arnett.
Very well.
Yeah, you have to speak louder.
Louder.
Yeah.
Can you hear me well? Thank you so much for inviting the UN Human Rights Summit here. My name is Teresa Arnett, and I work in a small team at Asociación headquarters in Geneva. We work on the intersection between climate change, environment, and human rights. This is my first COP, so I think I also have a lot to learn from all of you. I just want to say, we all know that in Latin America and in many other parts of the world, environmental human rights defenders exercise their great risk and the work that they're doing is for the benefit of all of us. Our office is acutely aware of that, and this is priority for us to support and promote the work of defenders as best as we can. At the COP, we've already seen several barriers to participation in many forms. It's related to accreditation, it relates to cost, and it's relating to exclusion from negotiations. And this is really detrimental for the negotiations overall, because the decisions made at the COP is really paving the way for what sort of future we and the coming generations will face. So let there be no doubt that public participation is key for the Unfccc to be successful and for the COP to be successful. We've already seen examples of the opposite of why it's not successful. The negotiations for the development of the supervisory body, 614 recommendations without participation, resulting in bad recommendations. We've seen Action for Climate Empowerment discussions last year, where human rights were removed in a sort of late night closed door session. And these sort of bad examples serve highlighting why participation is important. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they have recognized that for people in vulnerable situations, a rights-based approach and an inclusive approach to environmental action can make a real difference in their lives and also support better environmental outcomes. And we're really happy as the human rights office to see that messaging being part of these scientific reports. It is beyond any doubt that the right to participation is really one of the key principles of the rights-based approach that we talk about. And that participation is about putting human rights and people's voices, people's concerns, and also people's solution at the center of policy making. This is really what the human rights-based approach is about. We were very happy to see after the recognition of the Human Rights Council, but also the General Assembly, recognize that having a clean and sustainable environment. And that resolution also recognized that the exercise of human rights, including the right to see, receive, and impart information, the conduct of government and conduct affairs, and to an effective remedy is really vital to the of health environments. The right to participation is also recognized under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which specifically includes the formulation and implementation policy at international, national, regional, and local level. It's enshrined in Paris agreements. It's enshrined in Rio Principle 10, and no need to tell you all, also in the ESCA's agreements. And again, linked with access to information, which is really key to ensure that decisions are informed and evidence-based. Access to justice is maybe one of the few tools that rights holders have at hand and can invoke when their rights are either negatively impacted by climate action, which is what can happen and what we've already seen happen when climate action doesn't incorporate relevant human rights and environmental safeguards. And it's also very important when we talk about inaction. I just want to reiterate, because I heard this discussion between colleagues earlier, that what participation is. It is actually an obligation for states to promote and protect and fulfill that rights. And states are also obliged to protect people from issues that can negatively impact their human rights, and climate change is very clearly one of these issues. And we have a huge body of documentation from scientific bodies, from human rights treaty bodies, from special rapporteurs that documents these rights. The right to participation is really a key underlying element for many decisions and agenda items. As I already mentioned, ACE, local communities, indigenous peoples platform, gender action plan, and it's clear to us all, and this is also the messaging that's reiterated in our high commissioner's letter to member state that he sent out before the beginning of the COP. That more needs to be done to ensure that climate-related decision-making is transparent, inclusive, accountable, particularly to the people that are most affected. It's especially true at this point. The inclusive, safe, and meaningful participation, different civil society actors, without fear of intervention, without fear of reprisals, must be at the center of COP27 negotiations and outcomes. This is the only way that we can build trust between the people and decision makers and institutions. And again, including those most affected by climate change. We also have support from the Secretary General in this. The UN Secretary General issued what's called a call to action for human rights. And it really calls upon our system, the UN system, to create space for young people to participate in climate decision-making, shaping decisions that will affect their future. And he calls for the involvement of more stakeholders in climate policy processes and underscores the need to consider how to take account of future generations in decision-making. So it's really clearly a mandate from the highest level of the UN. Our office, in relation to UNFCCC processes, obviously we're working to highlight still the links between climate change and human rights, and to call for rights-based approaches herein, and the right to participation, access to information, access to justice. It's really key here, as it is in all of our work across the globe. I just wanted to mention as well, we do a lot of work to support and to try to protect, but let's be very careful in how we use the word protection. Environmental human rights across the world. We have many field presences in Latin America. It's one of the regions in which we have some of our largest field presences. Mexico is one example. They do a lot of work with indigenous local communities. One example that's more on the climate side is a pilot project that we did last year. And it's a bit of a buzzword, but we call it catalyzing rights-based environmental action. And colleagues therein both work to support environmental defenders. They have provided support to the Climate Justice Network, which is a network that they work with anyway, again, indigenous peoples and communities. But they also had discussions with government representatives and business entities to scope out what sort of room and space there is to do work on this. And I'm highlighting this just because it's one of the added values that we can have as the UN in this sphere, as the Human Rights Office, having access and working a little bit as a door opener or as a bridge builder sometimes, to have these conversations, which are not always accessible to the public. Just want to say there is no COP without civil society. It's not sustainable. Finally, I've talked a lot about the work of our office. Our office also supports special procedures mandate holders. And one of the new mandates that's have been created by the council last year is the special office for human rights and climate change. Michael Christel is sitting down there at the corner. She's working directly with the the special rapporteur. And she can tell you more about how he works, what the mandate can do or not can do. They do controversies, they recommend reports, they work in communications. So she's available to talk more about that. But I want to highlight it because it is another tool in your toolbox. It's another tool for civil society. It's another tool for people on the ground that they can use to have their voices heard, to hold governments accountable, and to try to impact decision making. Special rapporteur was here doing the first week on the COP for the first time as on this side of the negotiator. So he's very, very welcome to those negotiations. I'll stop here and look forward to discussing.
Thank you. Thank you, Anastasia, and thank you, Teresa. For the Ruta team, it's very and I think this was one of the main complaints that we heard from many civil society participants from COP26. We were not able to be in a big chunk of the negotiations at the beginning, and then we played catch up. There was limitations that were significant that were related to COVID in terms of access to rooms, that we could no longer stand or sit in the rooms, and the chairs were limited. And now we see that at this COP, where we see that COVID is no longer present, these restrictions are now in place as a standardized practice of the UNFCCC. And I find this very odd because when we were in the logistics meetings for COP26 with UNDSS, I think it's a security or the person that organizes all the COPs and has been doing it for many years. He himself said that he understood that not for us not to be in the room or sitting down was a change that decreased or degraded our sort of interaction and participation. But now we see that it is the practice. And for example, I was talking with UN Security, and now they justify it with the code, the fire code. So it's a pretty lame excuse to establish a new rule. And this idea with rules at the UNFCCC, one of the things that at least the research that we have been doing is that most of them are ad hoc rules. And you see at the, for example, we saw at COP26 this diversity of constantly evolving guides and rules that we were notified again and again that changed not only how we participated, but the process towards participation, which is something that we cannot divide. I mean, the process of how a public becomes, it's part of the exercise in the participation. The fact that visas are not on time, or the restrictions to travel, the timing of the information, the access to information about the decision, about the process, about who decides. This is also participating. To be in a room now or to not be in a room is very relevant. The fact that the UNFCCC understands participation and us being in another room, webcasting the conversation, that is not participation. That is something I could have done in Costa Rica. And that is also a new standardized practice that has been implemented by the UNFCCC. And if we start going backwards in time and how the COP started and how the relationship between participants or rights holders and the negotiations that happen, it is continuously degrading our rights. Now we're afraid to have a march that we cannot even go out. We are afraid to mention countries. We're afraid that people take pictures of our phones. We're afraid to see what happened in our hotels. We're basically constantly afraid. And even I in COP26, just because I was taking some masks in, face masks with a logo, the UK security was trying to get me arrested, and then my things taken because he said that I could not have any messaging in a face mask. And so all these different rules that keep emerging from the UNFCCC, they're not consensus based, they're not written anywhere, they just pop up from guidelines from the UNFCCC. And when you try to find it, there is no logic between them. And this is something that even within the bodies of the UNFCCC is also very, very noticeable. There is not a standardized approach to participation. In some bodies, we have more rights to speak or to submit or to participate. And in some other spaces within the UNFCCC, we have less rights. So there's not even a criteria, it's just more the will of the parties. And that is something that we also have to think about. It is a party-driven process, but parties are not the only right holders in this process, because all those parties have international legal obligations, including many of them directly regional access rights. And it's more than a third of them that have signed or ratified one of these agreements. And it also implies that those that have ratified an agreement have the obligation, as the Almaty guidelines say, and eventually hopefully something equal in this CASU agreement, to change the regulation or to establish, in the case of the UNFCCC, rules that regulate criteria and participation. And if you see every single communication from the UNFCCC Secretariat, it only cites the rules of procedure, which basically say nothing to justify absolutely every single rule they or regulation or limitation that they establish on participation. And which lead us to the next question. What does participation actually mean in UNFCCC text? To me, it does not necessarily relate to the participation as in human rights terms. And one of the clearest things that we can find is the UNFCCC website when it says that participation is not open to the public within UNFCCC spaces. So what kind of interpretation can we draw from this? Who is the public then? Are observers rights holders for the UNFCCC Secretariat? Or is it just a concession of parties that were there because we're invited, because we're accredited, and our rights can be taken at any time? So this is one of the things that, at least from civil society, we have to start having a serious dialogue, not only with the UNFCCC Secretariat, but with signatory parties that they acknowledge that as being at the UNFCCC, it's not only that we're rights holders, we're subjects under international law with some rights within the process. It is not only the states that have rights within the process. And that is something that at least access agreement and custom and practice have acknowledged not only in the UNFCCC, but in also other international forums.
Thank you very much, Adrian, Teresa, and Anastasia for this space. We are going to open the space for questions of the audience. And after that, we are going to have our next section. So I don't know if there's any question. And I know that the translation system is crazy right now. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Oli Henman from Action for Sustainable Development. Very, very strong presentations. And I want to speak up on something you just mentioned at the end around how to standardize the participation across different UN spaces. I mean, we work with some of you also in the SDG space, and the very similar process, as you know, happens around the high-level political forum in New York as well, where we've been told many times that it's a state-led process, and only the states have the official positions, even though there is the kind of recognized stakeholder engagement mechanism there at the HLPF as well. So I wondered what the OACHR can do to help to raise the bar across all those different UN states. Is there scope for some kind of guidelines, or as Adrian's highlighting, some kind of playbook that would actually apply to participation across the UN?
Any other questions?
Question. I can tell you that as the Human Rights Office, this is really part of our common work with other UN entities. We do have closer collaboration with some of them. We work very closely with UNEP, with that's related to environmental rights defenders. We have an MOU with them. With the ECLA, we have something that's called something like a collaboration agreement, where we work and support the processes related to this. Some of this is work in the making. I think that's for all the different UN environmental related negotiations and discussions. We try to be there, both to be visible, to make the points there, but also to work behind the scenes with colleagues as we go by. The UNFCCC is a space that colleagues have been engaging with for quite some time, but we're also increasingly engaging with other conventions, such as the UN certification, and we're also engaging in the biodiversity discussions. very specifically and physically on the ground in terms of this COP, I think that the combination of the processes that are already in place, and many of these are agreements and decisions made by member states and parties, the country in which we're in, which makes many of these concerns more acute, in particular for national organizations, it's also an opportunity to do this work better, because it really makes it absolutely clear that these processes are participation deficient. What we've been doing in the lead up to the COP, and what we are still doing throughout the COP, is to have these discussions with the colleagues that have different responsibilities within the UN system. I think that this is something that Adrian refers to. You have the UN Department for Security, which is in charge of the blue zone, and which is doing that on a regular basis. They are the professionals on security within that space and have very clear guidelines for what their scope of work is. We have met with them, and we are continuing to discuss with them to make sure that we can have a common understanding of what sort of barriers to participation also relates to their security work. And then you have the Unfccc colleagues who have an agreement with a country and a host country that is also selected by state parties, where we think that there is more scope for improving the understanding of what sort of participation barriers there is there. The Unfccc has a dedicated focal point for civil society that I hope many of you are in touch with, and I also understand that both they and the UNDSS will do. So don't hesitate to voice these concerns and to document them so that they understand what the obstacles are and understand where there is scope to do something from the Secretariat side, and where there are decisions that are for the bodies or for the parties. I really encourage you all to share this information when you can, when it doesn't endanger anyone, because we can bring those concerns forward. And when we bring those concerns to the attention of colleagues, the more concrete information we have, the easier it is for them to understand and to act. They reassured us that at the outset, whoever was accredited to the COP would get the visa. But of course, there's something with the timeline there. So if the visa application is sent too late, then we need to agree on what too late is, right? There are these nuances, but just to say that there is some scope for sharing information about what's happening, about the barriers to face. We will definitely be at the barriers to share that information and to work for our system to do better for the UN as a whole. And then we have all the silent discussions that we try to channel at the most senior level possible on our end, to make sure that also these messages reaches the senior level in the other parts of our body. So we are one UN, but we have different strengths and weaknesses, and we try to complement that. I hope that answers some of your concerns and questions, and maybe some of what you said later, Adrian, as well. I mean, we are also here as observers. We are also there together with you sitting on the floor. We are also the ones being asked to leave because we're sitting on the floor and it's not allowed. So, we're really trying to make sure that that's clear to everyone, that that's not good enough. Thank you.
I don't know if there's another question. Okay.
And for you, this is my first talk in this discussion has been extremely useful. And should be from your I work with policy in other treaty frameworks, and I'm quite shocked to see the transparency and restriction of that is one of the preferences that your point on documenting what we've seen as well. You said all of us have had different experiences. What can we do to make most use of what we are seeing without this week and the next week? combining it, having all of the civil society organizations, signing on, submitting it to your office, or civil society, open for much over, is making sure that this is documented formally and you have this organization doing putting down a marker that this is happening. We moment in the year and observe going to all this stuff. Because we've there is the trying to organize the protest and the protest over the result. And most likely that's not going to get approved, but it's also quite telling that more protests that happen in the protest. Yeah, we need to think about what we do and not leave this moment pass.
Thank you very much for that question. It doesn't have to be very official. I'll give you my email, my signal number, and just be very concrete and also very short if possible. Just cite cases where you can, generic concerns when you can, and we gather this information to share with our counterparts. We'll still be meeting with some of them during this week that is coming. We're sharing it with our senior officials, and it will also feed into our overall assessment of this COP and of other participatory or non-participatory UN processes in general, so that we can do this better. So I'll share that with you, and we really welcome it tonight. I think that police also welcome it, because it's also for the UN to have the information about what things look like from an observer point of view, to understand, what we can do to facilitate this. I really want to say that all the colleagues that we are working with and discussing with, there isn't any bad will anywhere. There can be lack of understanding, and there can be mandates that are restricted, that limits, and that's the definition of bureaucracy, right? That everyone has their own responsibility. But I don't think that any of this is bad will. It is just everyone trying to exercise their functions within the scope of their mandate. But our mandate is very clear, so it's very easy for us.
And maybe just comment on bureaucracy and mandate. I think that is why it's so important to have this discussion on clear rules that are taken by parties, not by the Unfccc Secretariat. At least guidelines, where a process to have a rule, a process to complain. I think that is probably the most useful thing that we could have, because we don't have anything. And what is created for one COP then disappears for the other. And in the guidelines to participate or to be at a COP, there's this manual that the Unfccc has. It has nothing to do what we saw in COP27, nothing to do what we saw here. And this lack of procedures doesn't give us a chance to then complain. Because do I know when and how was the room for assessing capacity to assign the number of chairs it has? Is it really actually compliant with a fire code, with Egyptian law? Is that it? Because it's that the size that it has is far bigger than my own house, and it has so many empty spaces. It's very hard for me to understand and there's no actual details or anything or anyone to complain. So this is very important, at least from a civil society perspective. Okay, and maybe I don't know if Crystal want to add something, but I also want to comment that this last time I speak, so we can have the other panel because we're late. There's also already a big report on civic spaces that was tailored, made for the UN Secretary on how to perform the UN in terms of making a civic space, and how as rights holders for the public should have more participation in all UN spaces. So it's not that the UN has not assessed this, it's that we need to put clear guidance that are applicable to the Unfccc. And in this space, it's probably the Unfccc parties that have to take some time to actually make participation at the Unfccc a reality, and not just some concession we get depending which country we are at. I don't know if you still. It is.
Okay.
See it then.
So as it is mentioned, I support the mandate of special human rights and climate change. And he has been engaging with the government of Egypt and with the international community concerning this problem. Actually, several members have been involved in this work, including special members on human rights defenders, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly association, and special on terrorism. You may have seen we also issued press release in this topic last month, expressing concern about participation in all these restrictions in the United States, as well as the fear of reprisals, which may happen particularly after the problem. So as we mentioned, if you do want to collect all this information on these cases, if you also want to share that, don't be a good way for us to follow up on this. We're also trying to engage with Unfccc as Secretary about how to prevent this from happening in future problems. That's the kind of human rights standards that those countries have to provide. So this is something that we are trying to engage with them on, and any suggestions we have also be aware of.
If we don't have any more questions, we're going to pass to the next section of the space, where we are going to speak about the barriers of participation in the Unfccc, with the participation of Catalina Gonta from FARM, Argentina, Javiera Lecourt de Zeus, Sebastián Duic de Ciel, and Joy Chaudhry, the ESCR. So if you want, you can pass in the front, please. Well, thank you, the three of you, for being here. I'm going to start with Catalina.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? So I think there's been many things said previously. I don't want to overlap, and I assume maybe my colleagues here will delve into the more procedural or legal issues in the Unfccc in terms of barriers for meaningful engagement. But I feel like there's a couple of points I would like to make. First one is, although there's been over the years more and more engagement or numbers of constant actors participating in clubs, actual meaningful participation has gone down. Like we are being shut down from actual decision-making spaces. So our participation is becoming less and less meaningful. And I can talk to different reasons I think this is happening. I mean, of course, there's all this barriers related to accreditation, just being able to get the funding to get to COPs. I mean, all these issues that have been already highlighted and I think we all know firsthand, which is like the first and
primary barrier, I think. But also once we get here, there's so many things that have been happening in the last few years, like I believe around just having a huge asymmetry also in terms of access to the spaces between, for instance, other non-state actors such as lobbyists. So we need to start with that. I mean, we've all seen the recent Global Witness report around like how many fossil fuel lobbyists are here, even more than the delegations of the 10 most vulnerable countries here. And I think that is, I mean, it's not maybe a direct barrier, but I think it's really important to point out because it just speaks to this huge difference in just power, access, and lobbying influence, and that is a direct force that goes against the achievement of the convention goals. And I think that it's really key to address this conflict of interest in the Unfccc. So strengthening the procedures of admission, also and adding requirements to the disclose or prevent these entities with opposite interests or interests that conflict the ultimate objective of the convention is really important. And I just pointing this out because I also think it happens. This asymmetry is also true for large global organizations versus grassroots communities, indigenous peoples, local communities, and small NGOs from the global south. So this, I think, is also a big issue to highlight because it really goes down to whose vision and narratives gets showcased and mainstreamed in these spaces, and that definitely has an influence and impact on what's decided here and ultimately what will happen at the national level, at the local level, and in countries. So wanted to point that out because I think like many things have already been mentioned before in terms of just like all the access situation overall. I mean, Adrian also mentioned like the huge difficulties we had in last COP and in Glasgow. All this leaders summit in the beginning was also a huge distraction also from what we were experiencing in the ground, just not being granted access to like some negotiation rooms because it was closed because of security reasons. Just like the whole lack of communication between the secretariat and non-state actors during those days. It was chaotic. It was super frustrating. It was such a hard effort for us to even be there. And we were just watching sessions on TV, basically, which internet didn't work well there, to be honest, anyway. So, I mean, we are starting to normalize all these things that, I mean, it looks like it's all logistical issues, but I think it's also, we have to really start questioning or realizing that this is not really, I mean, this is also happening, I think, for a reason, and not pointing fingers at the organization, but just how this whole circus around COP also grew so much and is distracting so much from the actual progress that needs to be achieved. That leads also to this kind of justification of just justification of non-state actors being able to access or be meaningfully engaged in the negotiation rooms. Another point I wanted to make briefly, maybe that won't be mentioned by my colleagues here, is that of maybe the power of narratives overall in the Unfccc space and the actors and initiatives that are being promoted. Because narratives have a huge influence on policy making processes and
practice, implementation, and also have a huge narrative of a huge influence on who gets access to decision-making spaces ultimately. And I'm saying this because what we're also seeing is lots of slogans or campaigns or just approaches to some climate solution that just reinforce and reproduce power imbalances and asymmetries. And I think this is also something that has effects on who gets access to those spaces and that hamper participation. And for instance, just to give an example of what I mean by this, some initiatives or framing such as nature-based solutions, climate-smart agriculture, they are being really promoted by the status quo, so to speak, and it's really they provide just a marginal engagement or role for indigenous communities, local communities, and even in a tokenizing way. And I think this is also something that reinforces this power imbalances and that we also need to be wary of. I mean, we're always like focusing on actual on in the ground, like access to the negotiation rooms or access to just being able to be here and COP at all, but also like who people will listen to is really influenced by the narratives as well, and like the basically just the framing of these solutions and where they're coming from for the climate crisis. So I think this is also important to know. And just on the last short note, and I can maybe comment later on depending on what you want to add. We also face like national circumstances where COPs are. I mean, we're all very aware of the delicate situation we're embedded in right now at COP. This first week was extremely hard and scary in many senses. We've heard all the just like the restrictions and the human rights issues that many of us were even scared about talking about, because we don't have necessarily the backing of large organizations or just like the guarantees that we won't have we won't suffer it, like we won't have implications on what we're saying here publicly and what we can communicate and what we can do, what we can protest. And I think that made me think that we're now environmental defenders in a potentially dangerous, risky situation. And I think that it's here where we should also have protection mechanisms. And I think that this is something that we should also address in a way, because we know that COPs are getting more and more big, complex, harder to access to. The democracy is at stake in many places. Human rights are at stake in many places. And I think environmental defenders are facing more and more risks. And I think it's really important to also find ways to address this in this frameworks and mechanisms. So I'll just leave it up there and to my other colleagues. Thank you, Catalina. I'm going to give the mic to Sebastian Rick. But I really want to point out that even today in the morning before coming here, we were speaking about the safeness of this space, and if we were in a safe space doing this kind of discussion. So I think it goes beyond the space of the COP, and it put us in a position as civil society where we think twice before speaking up and putting all these problems.
Excellent. I'm not so sure whether I can add to the conversation, because so much has been said already on the norms, on the frustrations, on the situation we experienced. But I think this point about the chilling effect that the location of the cup has is very critical one. I would like to know who can raise his or her hands and just claim that you haven't self-censored since you arrived in Chile. It'd be very interesting to know if any one of you has been brave enough to say all the things you wanted to say without self-censoring because of any concern for you or for people you think with, or people you are associated with. I definitely have it. It's not just bravery, of course, it's also concerns for people around us, but I think it has a tremendous impact. If we, human rights advocates, are not saying the names that are needed to be heard in those forums, and who are going to call out governments, and others. Bias to COP, I mean, I was thinking, trying to list some of them. I can describe like one COP when we had actions that were extremely censored and polished by the secretariat. The secretariat literally had one person. We wrote our actions to explain us how to do an action that looks a little bit more positive and nicer, how we could remove names of countries. There were collective sanctions. If someone had done something wrong, the entire organization would be kicked out of it. It happened to a couple of organizations. Entire organizations removed from the conference because of someone having gone a little too far during an action to calling out specific governments. The venue being shut down and 99% of civil society not being asked to stay in one area, being refused access because big decisions were going to be made. And preventive actions being taken by police authorities to actually ensure that some of the activists do not enter the country or would be stuck in their hotels, in their accommodation, and even some of them being on temporary detention for 24 hours just before the march. That was Copenhagen, in the center of Europe, one of the countries who would expect to be championing those issues. And I wanted to highlight this because I feel like we speak about this here, of course, given the context we are in, but also as to some extent, like we're experiencing this, we need now the UN and others to help us. Some of us have worked on these issues for over decades, spent countless hours engaging with the secretariat, trying to explain that civil society is not sugarcoating, is not there for better and more inspiring tweets, but it's there because it's a right for us to participate on. In particular, for those who are not even in the government, who are trying to get their voices heard in those ways. So this is my desperation in a way. It's like we can continue to speak about this, speak about the importance of the Aarhus Convention, the new special rapporteur on environmental affairs, the role of the UN Office of the High Commissioner. It's great for human rights. It's great to see you here because when in Copenhagen, UN institutions were not involved in these issues. Right? There's definitely a lot of progress made, but now we need to find how do we do the step change in our advocacy, in our engagement, in our call for accountability, including with the Unfccc secretariat, to really get to a different place, because otherwise we just go in the circles. To come back to the question, I mean, a lot has already been said. I feel like one of the challenges from the legal perspective are the rules of procedures and the misunderstanding of what is in the rules of procedures. Children for many years were not allowed at the court. The CSE defends their rights to participate and have their voice heard. That's a UN convention that has been ratified by every country on earth. Of course, without North American, that is not do that. But every other party to the UFC has ratified this convention. Yet the secretariats have the sense that some UN rules somehow prevented minors from, and it took us years to manage to get minors accessing the venue. Now there are a lot of children. They are told they cannot speak in contact groups because of rules of procedures. There is no rule of procedure, but black and white says people can only speak if they have a certain age. But yet the security, the secretariat, the facilitators enforce rules that are written nowhere. For a long time, we were denied access to any draft documents circulated in the conference. Any of the documents that we now comment on, to access them, we needed to have the parties linking them to us. But it was the time of paper document. So you have one copy of 30 NGOs trying to look at that. It was an extremely difficult time. And the secretariat told us, no, this cannot be done because the chairs of the meeting prefer not to have those documents leaked or shared with civil society. And the chairs of the meetings will tell us, no, we cannot. I mean, we never say no. It's just the decision of the secretary. We just wouldn't speak to one another because they had other more important things to do. It took us 3 years to get access to this document, and the only thing that helped us was that during one meeting we had both the chairs and the head of the secretariat, and we asked them, speaking to one another, who made that decision. The next day we had access to all the documents. But so there's this misunderstanding of rules and practices being there to prevent access that are totally misplaced. And I need, if I had one call for the Office of the Human Rights Office, just capacity building for the secretariat, explaining them what rules of procedures, international norms allow and do not allow, and actually what they require. That would be already amazing. The secretariat will be briefed on those issues. A huge concern is multi-stakeholderism. This has been discussed already. I mean, when you pass the security, it takes you, what, 10, 15 minutes to arrive at the COP. First, you are the climate solution or whatever it is fair, and then you have all those fancy pavilions, those hundreds of great corporate events, and then finally you get to the COP. The amount of energy, of space, of numbers that are dedicated to this important, perhaps climate fair, but that should be maybe in the green zone or somewhere else, that's where all of the energy goes now. And we have seen over the past years a very strong shift from constituencies that are welcome to speak because their participation was recognized, including in Rio. The 9 constituencies, of course, are based on the 9 major groups recognized in 1992 and related to Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration. Now, since Paris and since 2014 in particular, just a year before Paris, there's been a greater acknowledgement that actually what matters is not the voice that you bring, but how, like you're legitimate if you can demonstrate that you're taking climate action. If you're a business that can reduce your emissions by 0.1%, that's hundreds of tons of carbon, because you're probably polluting already a lot. That's great, and come and bring your solutions. If you are local communities, you're not reducing emissions, you're just asking for others to do this. Then we are being pushed aside because there is this greater shift on non-state actors. This is the term that we hear more and more. And non-state actors, very clear, it's businesses, it's local governments and municipal authorities and others. But it's really a shift away from the 9 major groups that was there to really recognize by civil society. And the population is composed of different groups that brings different perspectives, that have different rights, and all of those voices need to be heard differently. The reason for this is partly that just before Paris, there was a tremendous fear that Paris would fail, would not deliver enough ambition from governments. So we had to put more focus on the actions of corporate actors and others, just to claim that at least there is some form of success. Even the UN Secretary General now comes out and speaks about focused claims from corporate actors. I mean, in fact, in the mouth of the Secretary General, it's amazing to hear those words, but it shows like the level of desperation. So all of the proposal for conflict of interest will need to progress if we want to be able to reclaim the space in those laws. The Secretariat will always tell us, you're complaining about access. What do you mean? 40,000 people. I mean, half of them are just operating in pavilions and running events to speak about actions that have taken place very far from climate change. And then there is a total lack of understanding of what a right-based participation is. It's always about sugarcoating, about something nice to have at the end. Just some examples. In Glasgow, they realized COVID restrictions, the halls were too small. 48 hours before the opening of the conference, we decided to keep civil society out and to give 2 badges for each constituency for the first 48 hours, not to the plenary. This I will understand. To the entire area where negotiators were just operating, to their cafeterias, to everything, everywhere where we could be. Basically, we had access to corporate pavilions and 1 small supermarket. And I don't know if you heard that the UN security lost one of the badge of the environmental NGOs. It just didn't know where it was anymore. Like 50% of our access was just lost because someone had lost a piece of paper half that size. It just shows like there's no understanding of what we need to do there. Whereas there were more private jets on the tarmac of the Edinburgh airport than there were civil society allowed in the negotiating area. Another example, and I will just quickly because to move forward, is the subsidiary body on Article 6.4, dealing with carbon trading, an issue where the implications for human rights are tremendous. Black and white stated in its report because of other priorities we should not hear. At least it's clear, and it really reflects the literal understanding of the problem with this sentence. The fact that you cannot run a full meeting and decide great, like decisions of great implications without even giving the floor to observers. But they put black and white just not problems because they had other priorities. And finally, sorry, as part of this, the global stocktake is a very interesting, very inclusive process. When we see corporate representatives not participating, running, moderating conversations, we see operatives that are part of think tanks promoting geoengineering who actually facilitates discussions on mitigation as part of the global stocktake, not as part of silence. This is, I mean, where we are really running in circles, and we need to challenge all of this if we want to be able to see in the future a cover to be. So there's so many obstacles, so many challenges on top of all of the procedural ones and logistical ones. But I would say if we focus on exposing multi-stakeholderism and focusing on conflict of interest, for instance, but also really educating, emphasizing the need for right-based public participation, maybe at some point we'll be able to have conversation on Sunday morning that are different and not just about how we clear more space in order to prevent dangerous decisions. And I'm hoping that with so many actors now focusing on these issues, we'll be able to make progress, but I think we really need to step up our change. I don't want to call out anyone that hasn't yet had a chance, but I am still aware that, for instance, the new executive secretary used to work at the Chamber of Commerce. So I'd like to know, okay, how can we have a conversation with him about conflict of interest? He hadn't heard about the proposal, he said, yesterday. So it's a little disappointing, I guess, because of the amount of momentum behind this. But I will say we really need now to be more confrontational to some extent, because all of the techniques to work outside, to work with parties, to work with the Aarhus Convention, have just not delivered the results we're hoping. And we're having the same conversation with this second or third year about the need for more activity space.
Thank you. And now I'm going to give the microphone to Joe.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what you said, everything that was said. I don't have much to add. I guess I'm a part of a member-based organization. We're a network of members, and we have many of our members present. And our delegation has a number of movements, grassroots organizations. So what I did this morning was sit with them and ask for some ideas, and I bring those ideas to you. They're all in different meetings, so we're not able to be present and send their meetings. So I'll just share this with you, and a lot of it is what Catalina and Seb mentioned. But the participation rights are central for advancing human rights and climate justice, and without it, we will not reach Paris goals. Who is in the room plays a key role in setting the agenda and determining outcomes. And who within our movements is present in supporting the shaping of civil society response is also important, because there is not enough of free-flowing connection between those shaping international policy in these spaces, which know these spaces, and those in the front lines directly confronting the structural drivers of the climate crisis. Those who have knowledge of the real solution, those who are closest to the lands. So nothing about us without us is powerful for a reason. There is a difference between wanting to win and needing to win in how we participate at the UN. And we're not even there, right? Even people who have a lot of access generally are not able to participate in this. But what Catalina said about the importance of having those voices present at the UN FCCC space, that is very, very important in terms of how we participate, how we show up, and what we hold as our red lines within the process, and how we participate and for what purpose. So strong participation rights allow for a diversity of views to come together and unite on what is needed to really advance our missions. We also saw a lot of very depressing reports come out right before COP and how far away we are from actually meeting Paris goals. And we have those laws, right? We heard from, the former speakers and right before this section about the fact that access rights are deeply rooted in international law across human rights and environmental frameworks. But we also know as human rights actors, they do not work very well. They don't work in the UNFCCC space, but the right to participation also goes beyond that. And implementation is something that we are really, really struggling with. And now more and more actors, even agencies, speak so much about participation, which is great. But from our end, what we're seeing is that spaces are becoming more and more restricted and civic space is closing down in so many countries. Many people are not able to come because of the relationships that they have with their national governments. Barriers to entry, a lot of this has been spoken about, but what members shared was like, if they're new to this space, even the ability to get accreditation, the flight prices went up 2 or 3 times this year because of COVID. How do you handle that? Visas? There are many, many layers to the visa situation. Some people have to go to another country. So one of my colleagues from Honduras, he had to go to Guatemala to be able to get his visa. Imagine what that means in terms of trips, in terms of having to take time off from your job. And then there is a lot of structural discrimination that happens in securing visas when people do not get visas for absolutely no reason at all. There is the care work reality that prevents many women, or disproportionately felt by women, but not only, but that is disregarded when sometimes we talk about participation rights. And there is a technical jargon, right? Many of our members do incredible work on loss and damage, but they don't even use the terminology loss and damage. So them being able to share their vision or being able to see how their vision connects with these very technical discussions, that is something that is really important in being able to advance real solutions. So those are some of the things that were shared. And then again, at COP, once you're there are a lot of barriers that were shared relating to language. There are so many powerful leaders who do not speak English. The reason many of us speak English is because of colonialism, and they have so much to share, and yet all of us know the UNFCCC is not a language-friendly space. The Indigenous Peoples Caucus, that area is more language-friendly, but otherwise it's very, very hard for people who do not speak English to be able to navigate the space. And then there is a lot of other things. I mean, I think we all know this, but in terms of being able to participate at COP, who is participating, we also have to step outside of this process, right? Right now, you see intersecting crises hitting countries amidst the climate impacts. For grassroots communities and local communities to engage at this time is really, really difficult. It's not even often that they want to come because they have often given up on the multilateral process because it hasn't delivered for decades. They want to talk about challenging development models, and you can't even get parties to discuss on a finance facility. It's, we see I see Shrutis here from Global Witness. Global Witness talked about the fact that more than 1,700 environmental defenders were murdered in the last 10 years. These are people who should be in these spaces. So that's also something for us to think about. And then the issue of corporate lobbyists flooding these halls, which Katerina talked about, which Seb talked about. This is everything about narratives, right? This is everything about false solutions being pushed. There's money behind it. There are meetings happening. Article 6 has Shell's fingerprints all over it. And then we continue to see bad decisions being taken in the implementation. And that will not change until we take conflict of interest seriously, until we hold it as a red line. Conflict of interest is one of the most fundamental principles of law. I do not understand how this is even possible. To reach Paris, we need to really think about fossil fuels. And how is that possible when you have so many experienced lobbyists, more than 600, present in these halls? It's ridiculous. And in reflecting, we had this conversation with our members, especially for movements, should we be here? Do we even want to be in this space? And they said, if we're not in this space, everyone would be very happy. Our voices would be invisibilized. It would carry on. We want to come here. We want to share our views, even if we're not heard, even if we're not respected, because that is also something, even if people come to talk, who is listened to is a very different matter altogether, right? But our analysis, our truth matters. We will put it out there. And because the world is changing so fast, people will listen. It may be too late, but people will listen, but we have to keep speaking the truth. And not ensuring the right to participation, we see from the Unfccc report how serious the consequences are. When top-down solutions are just put on communities, you have things like maladaptation. We're seeing the same thing in loss and damage. So instead of actually supporting, people on the front lines, what you're seeing is a heightening of societal vulnerabilities because people who do not understand our local context are talking on behalf of vulnerable communities and making decisions that do not work. Not always, but for a lot of it. So yeah, what can we do? I mean, a lot was said and I agree with all of that. The conflict of interest, absolutely, that's something we should get. Textual references, reinforcing the right to participation really helps. Thinking through some of the structural barriers and seeing how we in civil society can also support our colleagues in alleviating some of that, but also seeing if there are ways that can be supported from decision makers. Thinking about the multi-layered forms of discrimination that marginalized groups experience when denied participation rights is also something to think about. Things like visas, for example, and what we can do there. And barriers to participation within the UNFCCC is absolutely linked to barriers to participation outside of the UNFCCC. So really reinforcing, emphasizing, ensuring that the right to self-determination of Indigenous peoples are respected, for example, that there is the right to full and effective public participation being guaranteed and enforced for rural and urban populations is really important kind of across the board. And then I guess, I mean, this is, I don't even know in terms of where we're at and where we need to be. But one of the things that was really emphasized in this, when we had this small meeting right before I came, was the overarching barriers to participation are often linked to systemic racism, there are unequal wealth relations, there's increasing repression. And if we don't address that, if we keep looking at law as these norms, we will not get the right that actually is meaningful for the people who hold them. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, the three of you. I don't know if there's any question or comment. Nope. Okay. You ready? Wait.
I will speak first. I forgot to. One of them is Martin's. She's really for so many years. We're really grateful for this series on this. Just waiting for to keep those conversations. And he needs the blue box. I know some maybe sound very negative, but now we're here and we're monitoring and we can use our tools and say, well, we've 10 years and not just change. Well, during these 10 years, I think what has changed is that we didn't run a system. So we have just about almost every special rapporteur mandate holders who are navigating on the issue. So the special rapporteur on climate change that has been a separate mandates. Use the evidence so that they're all engaging. Same with the three bodies. And then I just want to mention that the UN has a specific reprisal mandate which covers everyone who wants to or is attempting to engaging in your processes. And I can share the email for that. We have to work on that matter. It's our ASD who is sort of the mandate holder for that. And if we have cases we want to raise, that you don't take in danger for raising this, it also go into the annual report of the Secretary General on this. Now, we send those to the report. That report again can be interacted by our senior officials when they interact with operating senior officials and the member states. But listen, remember that it's specific. It is for the rest. It's actually named in this having been annexed or having been reprised against because of the national sphere. Like it's not a private. None of them is enough, but please use that.
So I want to thank everyone for staying and for listening to the space and all the people that participated. And at the same time, maybe to recap some of the things that we discussed. Definitely, and thinking also about the space we had in the morning, the participation in the UNFCCC is for the civil society is more complicated than what you see on social media. Like usually when you speak to someone and you say, I'm going to COP, they see like, wow, right? Like they think that it's amazing and that maybe you have a lot of money and that's why you are here, right? But when you start to see the details and when you're an NGO and you try to be in this kind of space, you realize that it's not easy at all, especially if you come from an indigenous community or if you come from the other side of the world and you don't have the resources. And then when you get there, you realize that you cannot participate in all the spaces that are available. So to start discussing this topic, to start putting the topic on the table and what's it say? Demanding and demanding like these spaces for participate is the things that we can do from social society, and also opening the spaces for the people that is in the communities where we work, because as the people that was in the morning, they were from indigenous communities and they were speaking how all they have the same problems that we have, but I think duplicated or triplicated. And sometimes we forget that we have a privilege of being here and that we represent the voices of the people that couldn't come. So I really want to thank all of you for being here, and also the representative of the UN, because these are the voices that we want to be heard and to bring this message to other spaces. And just for a funny fact, all the thing that we don't have sound and that we don't have translation here, it was because the participation, because the resources were not enough to having a person translating presential, and at the same time we didn't had access to sound in an hotel. And if you saw the hotel, it's a very big, and they were charging us for everything. So I think that's a way also to limitate the participation of civil society and especially NGOs. So thank you all for being here, and I don't know, Adrian.
So from our side, we're very interested in always promoting social participation. We work a lot on pandemic. It's one of the things that we really care also about. And hopefully we get to explore together this issue. I think at least from people here will care a lot about participating. And also if we're working on other issues, this is sort of the main thing that will not enable us to have an impact. We don't have the conditions to participate. And for us, very important now to take this more systematically and more deeply, but also to promote changes from our perspective, because it's not enough to complain and usually, for example, I wanted to complain about the sleeping on the floor roof. There's no way. I couldn't pass through the door today, and they went home. So they told me send an email. I sent an email, and nobody answered. So I'm probably going home with no answer. And that's it. That's all I can do. And so it's something that we feel we have a right to have. And then again, I'm very thankful. I know it's Sunday. Yours here could be in the beach. And so I know you're very committed, and I thank you a lot for coming.
Thank you.